This is my unboxing and review of the new Scream Factory box set that contains the 3 Ape Woman films from Universal, as well as The Monster and the Girl. I really have to say this is one of my most anticipated titles of the year to be released. I don't often pre-order things because I find that you can find cheaper prices if you just have a little bit of patience usually. Because what happens is that people who don't want copies end up with copies and they sell them on the aftermarket fairly cheap. This series is not really true of that, though, because unfortunately it really appeals to a limited amount of horror fans out there. So in this case, I did pre-order it out of excitement. There's a couple controversies about this set that came up when it was first announced and then when the specs were first announced, and I'll get to those in a little bit. For right now, you just look, there is The Monster and the Girl. Now, this was originally a Paramount film that Universal ended up with. It's kind of a programmer, and it is by far the worst film of the bunch on this set. It's not without its redeeming features. It is pretty stylish, but it's just not, honestly, very good. Next, we come to the reason to own the set and the calling card, which is Captive Wild Woman. Now, this film is not really well regarded today by most. I love it, but it was very successful in its time. It garnered 2 sequels, and it was a solid franchise player for Universal, which they wouldn't have again until The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Its first sequel is, of course, Jungle Woman. It really is as much a remake as a sequel, but they brought back Aquanetta in the starring role, which was absolutely important, and J. Carrol Naish is in it, who gives a really fun performance as well. It's solid, it's good, it's just not going to hold up to the original, and that's kind of common with a lot of sequels. Finally, we have the second sequel, Jungle Captive, and this film is going to disappoint Ape Woman fans every time we see it. Aquanetta is gone, replaced by Vicky Lane, who's fine, don't get me wrong, but there's something magnetic about Aquanetta in this key role, this signature role. You'll notice that this set is a little bit odd because you have a trilogy mixed with another film that thematically is kind of similar, which was produced by another studio and then acquired by Universal and has become part of their legacy. That might seem really odd to you. It is worth remembering that Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, was originally a Paramount production that Universal ended up with the distribution rights to as well, so it's not unheard of. The box set comes with a booklet. It has a lot of very familiar stills and reproductions of both the lobby cards, the many posters, including the day bills. The one thing it doesn't have anywhere on this set, including in this booklet, is a description of the movies individually. There's one block of text on the back cover and on the back of the case that describes all 4 films in rapid succession. And I think that's a little disrespectful. These movies might not be as respected as Frankenstein, Dracula, or The Wolfman, but they are prime examples of a golden age of the B-movie. Aquanetta, of course, would go on to have quite a legacy beyond her heyday. She'd be interviewed by Fangoria in the 80s, and she'd even be featured as the main character of a operetta that appeared in New York called Aquanetta. I didn't get to see that production, and I'm not completely convinced I'd want to. It does seem to be one of those gimmicky stage productions. So the set itself is very nice. I appreciate that they went with the same themes as the previous, but look at one thing here. They went with my least favorite of the 4 stills that was used as a poster for Captive Wild Woman. My favorite is always going to be the shot where Bob Burns' Sheila is holding Aquanetta over his head. In fact, I have a tattoo of that image. The discs themselves are nice. They're nothing special necessarily, but it all looks very professional and very nice, as you'd expect from a company like Shout Factory or Scream Factory. You will note they all say not rated. That is because these films came out at a time when all you needed to do was satisfy the Hays Code, which they all did. So, the danger of me doing a Captive Wild Woman unboxing and then kind of review, more of a review of the physical discs that have been released by Shock Factory instead of the movies themselves, is that I could talk about Captive Wild Woman all day. Universal classics are kind of strange because everyone kind of can rally around the Frankenstein films and the core Mummy Dracula films. But they made a lot more films than that. I mean, a while back, a box set was released that called itself the Complete Universal Horror Classics or Monster Collection or something. And it was like 25 titles, which doesn't even amount to half of what they released during those years. For me, Captive Wild Woman was always the sweet spot. It was that film that brought everything I love about Universal's classic monsters all in one place. And it also had that wonderful 1940s B-movie aesthetic, because in the 30s, B-movies were either Poverty Row productions or they were expensive studio productions that were just aimed at a specific audience, whereas the 40s, it actually became its own art form, the B-movie. And I think it's important that we really have artifacts of that era, and there's none better, in my opinion, than Captive Wild Woman. It has all the ingredients, all the beats of the time period. It has a kind of misunderstanding of the science of the day. It has kind of fantasy elements that you don't want to look too deep at, but it also has some real psychology to it. Captive Wild Woman is, to me, about as perfect a B-movie as you can make, especially given that period. I think modern fans may jeer at the film, and that's unfortunate because there's a lot of fun to be had, and it's a really respectable film. It's really well made, it's well acted, with one exception. And I think it's just overall kind of an exceptional piece of exploitation cinema from a bygone era. Now, that one piece of acting I'm talking about is Aquanetta herself. Because while she's an amazing screen presence, and you can't take your eyes off her, not just for her beauty either, which is the obvious, she has an otherworldliness to her that even outside the Ape Woman films always came across. She always seemed a little bit too big, not just from the silver screen, but for our reality, as if she'd gone somewhere else, and we were just getting a reflection of when she visited. That's very poetic, but if you see the film, you'll understand. At first, you think, wow, this woman's a bad actress, and that may be technically true, at least at this time. But what she brought to the screen was something else, something that you get in snippets from people like Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, and even her co-star, Lionel Atwill. But she had something far beyond that. There was something haunting about her, as well as compelling. But enough about Aquanetta for now. When this box set was announced, the initial controversy was the inclusion of the monster and the girl. It, like the other films in this series, involves an ape and a girl and a transplant and kind of wonky medical history of the time. So it seems to fit real nicely, but there was a bunch of problems. First, it was a Paramount film that Universal had acquired. It still, when you watch the films, opens with the Paramount logo of the era. That's a little upsetting for a series that is supposed to collect the Universal films proper. But even if you were able to overlook that, it's just a different aesthetic overall. There's none of that Universal classic film gravity. That sense that you're watching something important, something that will endure, something that you'll be proud to own. It feels like something that you'd watch in the middle of an afternoon and never think about again. And that's not to the fault of any of the actors or even the direction, which is very stylish. It's just a matter of it's not that good a movie. And that's my opinion. Your mileage may vary, but it doesn't feel like it belongs on this box. And even from the point it was announced, it felt like that was going to be true. So it's not a big surprise that it turned out to be exactly that. The next controversy was Captive Wild Woman itself. The selling point of the box for, I conservatively estimate, at least 3/4 of its potential buyers. The rest were just people who were going to buy this entire series, no matter what movies they chose to put on each disc. But Captive Wild Woman has its own fan base. It's small by Universal classic monster standards, certainly, but among monster kids of a certain age, people who grew up reading Famous Monsters of Filmland and reading EC Comics, and then later on Fangoria, it was a very special film. and one we've been waiting for a proper release of. Now, there was a previous edition of this film on DVD from Universal as a print-on-demand disc, and that disc looks very, very good. It's a really solid transfer. In fact, even the VHS that was released back in the day really didn't look bad. In fact, I'd say it looked better than most of the Universal catalog at that time. But here's the thing. While every other film in this set, even The Girl and the Monster, received a new 2K transfer, they simply used the same high-def transfer that already existed of Captive Wild Woman. Now, yes, that means that all the films are available in high def, and they're all taking maximum advantage of Blu-ray. There's no question they're all 1080 presentations, but it's a little bit of a missed opportunity because we're running out of room and time for physical media. We all acknowledge that. We know it's true. This is the time to preserve these films in their best possible light when there's still a possibility of making some money back from a physical release. In the future, streaming is not going to afford exactly that same economy. What you'll make back on an older movie, especially one of this vintage, is just not going to justify the heady restorations of films that are essentially beloved B-movies. So here we have a situation whereas the film that's presented in its least definition is the selling point of the box. Now, maybe it's because I love the film so much, and maybe I'm biased, and, well, no, I'm definitely biased, but that's a big issue. Now, I'm happy to report that the disc does improve slightly on that previous version, even though it's the same transfer, or at least seemingly the same transfer. They've made no official announcement, but I've compared them side by side, and they look identical to me. Blu-ray does provide a bit more stability to the image, and maybe the grays are a little bit more true. But overall, this is the same picture quality from that DVD. And that's more than a little sad, considering the $50 to $65 price you're likely to pay for this set. Is it a deal breaker? No. No, because if you're a Captive Wild Woman fan, or an Aquanetta fan, or if you love the entire Ape Girl trilogy, you're not going to resist buying this thing, because it's not going to happen again. This is the last release for the physical home media world of these titles. So it's a win overall, and I don't mean to be coming off too rude or too crass or too mean towards Shout Factory, because this was obviously not a title that most companies would have even bothered with, let alone shown the kind of love that the rest of the series received. I mean, honestly, had they not done new transfers of the two sequels, I wouldn't have cared. If they'd left Girl and the Monster off this set entirely, it wouldn't have affected my purchase at all. Because, again, I don't really need to own the film. I don't think it's essential. I don't even think it's second-tier essential. You know, those movies that if you happen to cross cheap enough, you pick up. It's more like a film that if I decided to collect everything from the time period, maybe I'd bother with. So, I guess my end result, the final word on the matter is, it's a really good set. And the movies look really, really, really good. Are there ways to nitpick at it? Sure. It's hard to be angry about an additional film that adds not much value to the set because you're getting an additional film. The price tag's right in line with the previous sets, and while this doesn't feature Lugosi or Karloff, which seems to be the focus of the previous sets, it represents something a little bit more rare. The total true B-horror movie experience from the classic Universal Monster era. If you have a love for this stuff, if you are a monster kid, I do recommend picking up this set. And while you and I can have our little bitch session about what's wrong with the set, or not perfect about the set, I should really say, there's no denying that we're getting more rather than less at a time when the industry is suggesting we should receive less. Will this entire line make its money back? I don't know. I hope so. I hope it's an investment in the future, and these films will all look better and better as new technology rolls on. But for myself, I'm happy to have the set, and I know I'm going to get a lot of use out of it. Probably more than every other set in this collection. So to that I say thank you to Shout Factory and Scream Factory for putting in the obvious love for a title that too rarely gets even mentioned, let alone gets any legitimate love. But there's still that golden oasis on the horizon. There's still that perfect version of Captive Wild Woman that we still haven't seen yet. That ultra high definition restoration that the film so richly deserves, in my opinion. We'll probably never get it. And I'm okay with that if this is the end of the road. If this is the last time I get to buy a physical copy of this film, and it is one of those rare films, I would double dip, triple dip, quadruple dip, whatever the multiplier you pick, I would do it. The truth is, we got more than I ever expected to at this point. So pick up the disc and enjoy. I think it's a worthwhile investment if you like classic horror cinema. And if you don't like classic horror cinema and you're looking at the poster of Friday the 13th behind me, I'm going to ask you to just open your mind for a second. Decade does not determine how good a film is, especially in the horror genre. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure if a lot of films from 80s, 2000s, 2010 era that we're all starting to warm over, I'm not sure if they're going to age quite like these tremendous films that are 70 and 80 years old. In fact, I'd place a bet against most of them doing so.